Today is October 10th. That means it is Indigenous Peoples Day. And here to talk to us about the origins of this holiday and some of the celebrations and recognitions that are happening here in our local area for our Native American communities is Andrea Knutson, Associate Professor of English at Oakland University. Andrea, thank you so much for being with us today.
It's my pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for hosting.
I appreciate having you on as well to talk about this. It's an important day, and it's really nice to see that in recent years, we've kind of switched things up in this particular holiday. And instead of recognizing a colonizer who was incredibly violent and frankly genocidal to Native American populations here in the U.S., we are instead recognizing now our indigenous populations, a diverse group of populations across the continental United States, as well as places such as Hawaii and Alaska and other territories like Guam and so on, Puerto Rico. We are recognizing these indigenous cultures on this day, October 10th, the second Monday of October. Tell us a little bit more about the origins of Indigenous Peoples Day and why it is so important that we recognize our indigenous populations on this particular day, given its history, recognizing a colonizer who was so violent and frankly careless with these populations when he, quote unquote, discovered the Americas.
The origins of the day stem from activism from within the Indigenous community. And these are long fought for issues of visibility and of respect and of dignity. Excuse me. We're long past making an argument for accuracy in our history. And the myth of Columbus is one that we've held dear to our hearts for too long. Not only do we celebrate, somebody who committed acts of genocide and other violences like rape, and colonization is inherently about white supremacy. We need to also remember that there are other historical figures from Columbus's time that were advocating for Indian rights. So there are other historical figures here who we could align ourselves with, who were working for social justice, even in Columbus's own time. So the fact that we sort of mythologize this person as some kind of hero or discoverer, it's important to remember that Columbus himself didn't even recognize his own discovery of the Americas. He went to his deathbed not actually recognizing that he had discovered a new continent. So we give credit to somebody who we have absolutely no reason to give credit for. Indigenous peoples have known this since colonization, and their activism is really the reason why we are able to kind of turn the dial here in our historical understanding of a figure who we sort of no longer need to look up to and recognize why Indigenous people are an important voice and members of our society.
And of course, it's important to recognize different tribal nations of Indigenous people in the U.S. in a variety of different reasons. Certainly the very diverse populations that were and still are here in the state of Michigan. And on campus at Oakland University, you and others over at Oakland are doing a variety of different things to recognize this day, but also to recognize local indigenous culture in the spirit of Indigenous Peoples Day and of these indigenous cultures. What are some of the examples of those ways that Oakland is recognizing the ancestral roots of indigenous people on their campus in Rochester?
Thank you for that question, because OU is actually doing some unprecedented work here in higher ed. We wrote over the course of about 2 years and in collaboration with Native leaders across the state, a land acknowledgement. But as land acknowledgements are meaningless unless they're backed up with action and made into a verb. And in order to manifest the promises of that land acknowledgement, OU designated an acre of land on their campus as a Native American heritage site. This land will be reserved for Indigenous practices, traditions, knowledge sharing, ceremony, and it'll be a place where community can come together, faculty, staff, and students, and regional members of that community can come and engage in their ancestral land practices and traditions. Land is key here. Because without land, right, then we cannot really support the sovereignty of these tribal nations. We are also celebrating Native American Heritage Month at Oakland University. There are a variety of wonderful events and speakers who are coming to visit the campus. These events are in OU's calendar. And I would encourage everyone in your audience to come and push back against the erasure of centuries of violent dispossession and genocide, and come and listen to your neighbors speak, your native neighbors speak. And you know, one thing I would keep in mind is that we have to repair this ignorance. As Michiganders, right, we know the history of Dearborn. We know the history of Detroit. We know the history of Hamtramck. We know the historical sort of populations of those areas. But can we name the tribes who make up Michigan's sovereign landscape? Do we know the tribes that we live near? And many of us can't. And so it's time that we learn about, we make history kind of more inclusive of the people who were here stewarding this ancestral land.
And it is really important too, because we learn so much about the land that we're living on, about the environment that we're living in, and the different ways that our interactions with this local environment, with the place that we're living, how that informs our history, how our history informs that, and the ways that we're kind of tarnishing some of those histories too in what we're doing with this land. And that's all the more reason why it's important to have these sorts of land acknowledgements, but also it is important to have these opportunities for Indigenous people to practice these historical practices, these important spiritual practices that in some cases we've seen in recent years, right here in Michigan, right here in our local area, those have been severely interrupted, and in some cases violently interrupted.
Absolutely. If you think about the in February, the Sugar Bush celebration happens just as sort of spring is peeping around the corner from winter, and the sap is running in the maple trees. And we had gathered, the Indigenous community had gathered in River Rouge Park, to open the sugar mapling season. And with a ceremony, there was a sacred fire and drums and ceremony, and the Detroit police invaded the site. And with tactical gear, and threatened arrest against these people practicing ceremony. So these are religious rites, and we still are in a moment, we are still kind of in an ongoing historical moment of policing those religious rites, despite the fact that they are codified. And we need to be aware of that. We need to understand what the nature of these ceremonies are, and what the nature of these land-based practices are, these seasonal land practices. With education, with a better understanding of these communities and what their needs are and how they practice those needs, we can arrive at a more respectful exchange, at a more dignified exchange with these communities. And also remember that something like Sugar Bush, which has been sort of a long-standing tradition within the Indigenous and Native community, we ought to know better. The way that the Detroit Police Department interrupted that ceremony needs to be condemned, and there needs to be reparations for that.
We're joined by Andrea Knutson on today's edition of the Megacast. She is an associate professor of English at Oakland University, as we discussed today, being Indigenous Peoples Day in 17 different states across the U.S. and more will be joining in the near future. Adopted first in 1989 in South Dakota and here in Michigan as one of 7 states that adopted it. Sorry, 8 states, 7 that adopted it in 2019 as a holiday, and of course a replacement, rightfully so, of the previous holiday that was celebrating a violent rapist colonizer here in in the U.S. of these native populations. And so, Andrea, on Oakland University's campus today, what are some of the different things that will be going on to recognize our local Indigenous populations, particularly those populations that were in the area of Oakland's campus at this time, and some other ways that people can participate at Oakland University today in some of these festivities and recognitions?
All of our events at Oakland University are free and open to the public. And in terms of what you can do, first of all, I would say, Tyler, like you are already doing it. hosting me here today is part of that resistance and that pushback against erasure. I would read the Treaty of Detroit. I would begin with reading, if you are in the Detroit region, the 1807 Treaty of Detroit. I would read whatever treaty sort of matches up with the region that you are in Michigan. Start there and understand the language of it and understand what it means in its historical context. Education. We want accuracy. We want to learn about the histories of these tribes in Michigan. We want to learn about the kind of activism that has been undertaken here in Michigan. Native people, Indigenous people are in our classrooms, they are in our boardrooms, they are in our institutions, and we need to learn about those histories because they are also a part of the future going forward, the part of that conversation going forward. So the more we can open those doors in terms of our own understanding of American history, the better we can build a more equitable future and a better informed future. The events at Oakland involve, we will be inviting, and we have an Indigenous film scholar. We have an OU alum who is now in a PhD program at Johns Hopkins. She will be speaking on public health issues around food sovereignty and mental health in Indigenous communities. We have the film Gather being sort of shown on a loop in the Habitat in the Oakland Center. This is a beautiful film about the ways that Native communities are reclaiming food histories and food sovereignty. We also have a knowledge keeper, a plant knowledge keeper visiting campus and taking us on a walk of the new acre and of the biopreserve and sharing his ancestral knowledge around plants and doing some Anishinaabe storytelling. Those are only a few of a wide range of events. I would check the calendar. I am happy to distribute a flyer. Come, attend, listen, learn, and fall in love with a more equitable and informed future.
And our Megacast flagship Civic Center TV in the Greater West Bloomfield area throughout the afternoon today we'll be playing our 2019-2020 sort of documentary feature about Apple Island and the Native American histories there that was hosted and curated by Miquandan Jewel, a local Anishinaabe man, about his family and his culture's great heritage right here in the Greater West Bloomfield area. And one of the iconic places in our local area, Apple Island out on Orchard Lake, that will be airing all throughout the afternoon. You can find that on demand on civiccentertv.com. Andrea, anything else for us that we should know at this time about Indigenous Peoples Day or anything else we haven't discussed yet?
There is much to discuss. I think what we're doing here is opening a door, I hope, to the fact that Native people are here, they're living their life ways, and we have much to learn from them and much to exchange going forward.
Yeah, we don't have this land here in front of us and these resources that are here without the history that we have so brutally erased in so many cases, and it is more than past due for us to be learning about these populations, recognizing them and thanking them and asking for their forgiveness as well. Andrea, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.